Hi, welcome to Culture and Causation. I'm Aaron Briley. And on today's show, we'll discuss how my guest, Dr. Mary Grabar, wants to set the historical record straight. The topics she addresses are perhaps some of the most relevant when considering the cultural, social, and political events shaping this nation, from the Occupy Wall Street movement to the riots of 2020 by both BLM and Antifa, to the teaching of critical race theory in our classrooms and boardrooms. So the books we'll discuss today are Debunking Howard Zinn, Exposing the Fake History That Turned a Generation Against America, which came out in 2019, and her most recent book, which came out this year, Debunking the 1619 Project, Exposing the Plan to Divide America. And with that very brief intro, Dr. Grabar, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to discuss some particulars from both books, then maybe get your opinion on how these books fit into a bigger anti-American narrative. So I wanted to start with Debunking Howard Zinn. So what got you interested in debunking Zinn? Why was he on your radar, so to speak?
Yes, thanks. Well, I was teaching college at the time. I was teaching English at Emory University and another community college. And in 2008, I sort of learned about him. I had been writing articles about the corruption of education, reports, going to teachers' conferences, and just trying to inform the public of what I was seeing behind the ivy-covered walls, and say, hey, they're having this Marxist conference, for literature and this and that. And he came across my radar, and I wrote an article, and then I wrote a report and presented it in Washington. And I almost had a contract in 2011, and that fell through. Had nothing to do with Zinn. It was something to do with the publishing company. And then I continued teaching until 2013. And then my contract with Emory, which was something that was privately funded, ended. And I came up here to Clinton, New York, where I am now currently still a resident fellow at the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the Study of Western Civilization. But I have always been, I've been curious about indoctrination in schools from what I was seeing, at the college level and K through 12. And I was also concerned about communism and the infiltration of Marxism into our daily lives. And I was seeing that, 10, 20 years ago, we're now seeing it explode. And part of that, I think, arises from the fact that I was born in a communist country. My parents brought me here from Yugoslavia. It was communist Yugoslavia then. I was born in Slovenia when I was 2 years old. So I kind of know from listening to my parents and relatives and their friends and a trip back there, what life is like under communism. And I know that Howard Zinn was a one-time member of the Communist Party. And even when he formally left that, he was still intent on starting a communist revolution and doing it through rewriting history.
I see. And I think it's a really good point. I think a lot of people today romanticize communism. They don't really understand how bad it can be. And that's going to sort of take me into my next question, because in your book, you have 9 chapters in the book, and some of those chapters include, and I'll just read the titles, Howard Zinn, Icon, Rock Star, Columbus Bad, Indians Good, America the Racist, Black Mascots for a Red Revolution, and this little jingle, Ho Ho, Ho Chi Minh, Howard Zinn, and the Commies Win. So it does seem like from the titles and also from what you said, people romanticize communism, and they sort of look up to Howard Zinn as this icon. So my question then is, what are some of the key ideas that Zinn's history gets wrong?
Well, first of all, he starts with Columbus. And so I start my book with Columbus, and he quotes from Columbus's diary, and he misquotes, he leaves out key phrases. in order to claim that Columbus was this greedy capitalist and was solely motivated by his search for gold and wealth. And he enslaved the natives, chopped off hands when they couldn't, get the gold for him, raped, pillaged, and so forth. And that, of course, is completely wrong. Christopher Columbus was on a religious mission to convert the natives, and he was going to find the New Jerusalem and trying to find a way by sailing to the west, and hoping to meet the Grand Khan. And he had this kind of millennial vision, but he instructed his men to treat the natives kindly. But what Howard Zinn does is he does two things. He leaves out key information when he is quoting from his diaries. He leaves out words like, I believe we can convert them more by love than by force. And he plagiarizes from a book by his radical comrade, Hans Koning, who wrote the Screed for high school students, about 100 pages long. And Hans Koning is not a historian. He was a novelist and a screenwriter, but he definitely hates the West and hates this country, and is a Marxist, as was Howard Zinn. And if you go back and if you read William Z. Foster, the Communist Party chairman in mid-20th century America, you see in his book, his History of the Americas, that he presents Christopher Columbus the same way. So that is the standard Marxist way of presenting Christopher Columbus, to cast doubt on the legitimacy of this country, the discoverer. Well, there's nothing to discover, and he was not a great man. He was an enslaver, a rapist, murderer, etc., etc.
I see. And I guess I just want to, so that's one aspect. I can see how, like you said, Howard Zinn and these sort of Marxist, either historians or just intellectuals, want to redefine and rewrite our history, but it still doesn't explain to me exactly how it's so popular. Why did it catch on so much? I mean, I could picture someone trying to teach this and it just not really resonating with students or with the public. But in this case, this is a very popular book, isn't it? And how did it catch on? Why did it catch on? And why does it still seem to resonate with so many people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I still continue to think about it because it was published in 1980. So, over 40 years ago, and it has broken all sales records in terms of the kind of book that it is. It's a crossover between it's a popular book, and it's also used as a textbook. And it is a phenomenon in the publishing world because it sells more copies each year than the previous year. Generally, books level off, they plateau. But I think what part of it comes from his appeal. He was a celebrity. By the time he was writing it in the late 70s, he had led these Vietnam War protests. He had gone to North Vietnam to, get the American POWs. He was sort of this charismatic figure on college campuses at Spelman and at Boston University. So he already had that cachet. And also what he does, what he's very skilled at, he's a very skilled propagandist. He knows how to manipulate people's emotions through his writing. So he's presenting this information. He's an authority. He's got the PhD in history. But he says, I'm going to be telling you something that, these people in the establishment have been keeping secret from you. I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. Why do you think that in your elementary school, you were told that Christopher Columbus was a great man? But no, I've got the secret information. And then he becomes outraged. He arouses outrage in people because he builds up these images of suffering and of cruelty. And then he presents himself as being this crusading historian who is going to knock down all the other great historians, Bernard Bailyn and Gordon Wood, you know, the giants in their field, the ones who won the Pulitzers. And he is going to be the one, the underdog, the radical that's fighting the system and is going to tell you the real truth. And he's like, you know, it's like reading Catcher in the Rye. You know, you are, you know, you're the 15-year-old, you're frustrated, you know, but now you know the truth. And Howard Zinn does the same thing. And he's particularly appealing to young people for that reason, adolescents, and people who don't really know about history. And the last thing about his writing strategy is when he knocks down those giants of history writing, he makes the reader feel like, well, there's nothing more to read. I've knocked out, why go pick up Gordon Wood? Why go pick up Bernard Bailyn? I've already told you the truth. And so you read the 700-page book and you're like, I know all of American history. Wow. And I'm smart.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good point. I mean, I think this is probably why he targets young people and teenagers. And it's in school for those two reasons. One, they already think they know everything. And at that age, you just don't realize how deep knowledge goes. I mean, you could have a certain understanding, but there are so many layers. There are so many details in understanding something. So I think he can exploit that with this simplistic, superficial, and also very wrong account of what's happening. But like you said, if he's presenting it as this is the entire truth, this is all you need to know. And the second thing that's interesting about getting into schools and targeting adolescents is that there is this built up frustration or rage, or there's a huge transition in our lives. And I think there's a lot of rebellious sort of sentiment in teenagers, you know, and for good reason. They're getting ready to move on with their lives. And so if you can sort of if you can sort of show how all the adults have it wrong and all these experts are wrong, this is the real history, what they're telling you isn't right, I can see how teenagers would just really eat this up. I mean, hook, line, and sinker, which it seems like this is what's happening. And this is what has happened, right?
Exactly. And he makes them feel smart. He brings people to tears. They cry over the suffering. I mean, so he, you know, I have to hand it to him. He was very skilled in terms of, you know, writing this propaganda. If you read the other communist tracts, the history, they're dreadfully boring. But Howard Zinn was able to take the same message and write it in such a way that would appeal to young people and to people who you know, have tender emotions and want to help people and have sympathy for the downtrodden.
And I think you also mentioned in your book, and I think it's still continuing now, but there's this movement where people deface Christopher Columbus's statue. Is that, and that still goes on, where they throw, is it red paint on his hands? And so it's alive and well, this anti Christopher Columbus sentiment. And so, yeah, it's a live issue that is still with us today. So this is very relevant. Yeah. So let me just move on then to the 1619 Project, which is something that came out it's been around for about a year and a half, maybe now.
2 years.
2 years, actually. Been extra 2 years now. And so you published a book. It's called Debunking the 1619 Project, Exposing the Plan to Divide America. And this is just another revisionist history, right? I mean, this time, however, it places slavery at the centerpiece of our nation's origin and uses slavery as the central guiding principle of our socioeconomic and political systems. And so I was wondering, though, if you could explain for those who are unfamiliar with this, what the 16 Project is and how it's harming, well, first, just what it is, and then I can ask a follow-up question about how that harms the country.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so the 1619 Project was really nothing more than a special issue of the New York Times Magazine that came out on August 18th, 2019. It was that magazine, and there was also a broadsheet 15-page special issue within the paper itself. But the special issue, the 1619 Project, was the brainchild of Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is a reporter for the New York Times, and her beat was racial issues. And she remembered reading Lerone Bennett's book called Before the Mayflower in high school. Lerone Bennett was not a historian. He was a writer for Ebony magazine, and he is the one who came up with the term Black Power in 1966. Which was then used by Stokely Carmichael and other radicals that turned the civil rights movement into a violent direction. So that was her inspiration. And so it came out. And of course, 2019 was the 400th anniversary of when the first Africans came to Jamestown. They came pretty much by accident. They weren't, solicited. No one wanted to bring slaves in. They sort of showed up on this privateering ship, and they weren't slaves at first, as best as we know, as most historians understand it. They were indentured servants. But the premise of the 1619 Project is that with the arrival of these Africans, we have the beginning of our country, which is in reality a slaveocracy. And that's the word that is used. It's a Marxist term, but instead of it being a democracy or a republic, it is a slaveocracy. So that everything to the present day goes back to that 1619, and Nicole Hannah-Jones repeatedly says on Twitter and when she's on news programs, oh, this started in 1619, the January 6th, that goes back to 1619. Economic disparities, it's all 1619. And so that is the thread of the narrative, that problems that we have today, racial disparities, inequalities, all can be traced back to that date when slavery began. And it's not actually when slavery did begin here, but they claim that it is, and that all the forms of oppression, injustice, inequality go back, and we have not really made any progress or much progress since then. And it's and that in essence, this nation is a slaveocracy.
And so what this does, it seems like it like the effects of this program or this these ideas is that it undermines all our achievements up until now. It undermines everything that we've worked for and all the technological and political and social, cultural achievements that we've made. And it also seems to me to, it seems to kind of sort of let people off the hook for any, vices or issues they might have with themselves. I mean, I can see someone who's struggling, not because of any grand scheme to keep them down, just because of their own sort of human sort of frailties, which we all have and have to overcome as we grow up, from procrastination to, staying disciplined to being focused and all sorts of things that we have to, each and every one of us has to overcome. But I can see how this would be a very convenient sort of theory to go to if you're having a hard time facing those issues. I mean, I can see people just saying, oh, well, the reason I'm not successful or doing well, it's because of 1619 and it's a slaveocracy, and that affects everything. So it seems like, yeah, this theory is very neatly has these built-in sort of mechanisms to both denigrate the US for all of our achievements and to exonerate all the people who are not really living up to their own potential. Is that about right?
Exactly. So, my last chapter of Debunking the 1619 Project, it's a chapter about whether or not you want to accept, go on, or if you want to accept bitterness. And I quote Shelby Steele, who was on the Ben Shapiro program, and he says, he's appalled. I mean, this is a man who actually lived through segregation, knows what it's like. He's seen the progress that we've made. And then he goes to college campuses, and you've got these kids huddled off together, believing that they can't achieve, right? Talking about 1619. And it's not only that it's being used in college classrooms, it's starting at the kindergarten level. It's poisonous. It tells people, children, that they are doomed, that, how, if your society is so racist that, racism is in the DNA, as the 1619 Project proposes, then what's the point of even trying? Why even try? And it sets people up against each other, because it presents all white people as oppressors, still, because, it's in our DNA going back to slavery, and all Blacks or African Americans as the victims, as the oppressed. And so it stirs up this tension where often there isn't any, especially among young kids, as I know from having raised one, there isn't that, kids get along, but this introduces this, rather than, looking at people as individuals and, judging them on their character and so forth.
Well, that ties in really nicely to my next question, because I do think that both Howard Zinn's history and the 1619 Project are bigger players in this very sad but sort of horrible anti-American movement, and it does seem like they're fomenting a lot of unrest and animosity toward the U.S. And so I guess my last question for you, or my penultimate question, I think I might have one more, is, why do so many groups hate America? Now, this is a pretty broad question, but let me see if I can set it up. It just seems bizarre, because we have, one of the most prosperous countries on earth, this country. We lead the world in innovations of all sorts. We're ostensibly the land of the free and home of the brave. I mean, I'm not sure if that's quite true anymore, but that's what it used to be called. We lead the world in medical technology. I'm thinking about the COVID vaccines and others in cancer treatments. And so we have all that going for us, yet, and this just happened very recently, you have people, celebrities and politicians, sometimes celebrity politicians like AOC, which we just saw recently. She was at the Met Gala, and she wore a dress that said, tax the rich. And, this was the same gala that charged $30,000 per ticket. So it seems like we have so much good to celebrate, yet there are so many people who are fixated on the bad, both real and imagined. What's happening here? Do we know, do you have any idea why there's so much resentment and animosity toward a country that has done so much great things for human beings?
Well, yeah, I mean, as someone who used to teach and seeing it from the inside, and as someone who came from another country and, was exposed to those stories and saw firsthand for a brief period what the difference was, I think it goes a lot back to our educational system. People just aren't taught what communism is. They have no inkling. When I used to teach college, I would talk about communism, and these were Emory University students, and they automatically associate communism with the Red Scare. There's some Red Scare, some phantom thing that that these weird conservatives were afraid of, communists under their bed, and there was no such thing. That's what they're indoctrinated with. Right. But they don't hear about the gulags. They don't hear about the starvation in Ukraine. They don't hear about the repression, the 100 million that were killed by communist regimes in the 20th century. They don't hear about that.
By the way, sorry to interrupt, but that's not even in combat. These are like civilians.
Right.
Is that right?
Right. If they would just read what it was like in the Ukraine in the early 1930s, when Stalin deliberately starved those people, where people are practicing cannibalism, and you've got bloated bodies strewn around. I mean, and while in the meantime, you're shipping grain overseas or locking it up in warehouses. I mean, that's what communism is. They're taught that, oh, well, if we have socialism or communism, there won't be any hunger. People will share, will be happy, and there won't be this disparity among people. And the exact opposite is true, and that's been shown throughout history.
Are you optimistic about the future, about America's future, about the future of education? Are you hopeful, or being in the classroom and seeing what's been taught and seeing the trends, does it scare you a bit or worry you?
Well, right now it seems to be very frightening, but because it's amazing to me, the things that I was seeing 20 years ago in the classroom has come into our daily lives. But I think that's also a good thing. The cancel culture. I was canceled from a couple jobs because of being outspoken. But now it's like left and right, people are being canceled, and not, in academia, just regular jobs in the business world. But I think we have reached a tipping point, and I am glad to see that citizens and parents are rising up. They're seeing how toxic this material is, and they're going to the school boards. They're going and lobbying to change the laws, to keep critical race theory out of the classroom, to keep the 1619 Project out of the classroom. And really, I believe there is strength in numbers. And when I was teaching, I was also speaking at certain groups, Tea Party groups and others, and I would tell people, you've got to call your legislator. You've got to go to these meetings. They will notice you when you are there in numbers. That's what politicians are concerned about. They're concerned about the votes. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that with this uprising, and if it continues, and if people speak out in an informed way, which is what my book is intended to help with, is to give the facts and to give the history, through 60 pages of footnotes, why the 1619 Project is not only emotionally harmful, but is wrong historically. No matter where you look, back to historians, you can go back to as far as Carter Woodson and John Hope Franklin. They knew better than this. They would be appalled at the 1619 Project.
My last question is, where can people find you or your work online?
Okay, I have a website, marygrabar.com. That's Grabar. I also have a nonprofit called dissidentprof.com, and you can access the site to my book to purchase it. And also, I encourage you at Dissident Prof to get on my email list. I send out notices when I have things published or I'm going someplace to speak, and it's a great way to stay in touch.
Great. Well, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Dr. Grabar. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me.